Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bolling along with Kat Timpf and Eboni K. Williams. We are the Fox News specialists. The White House pressing back against the anti-Trump smear campaign, responding this afternoon to new reports about Jared Kushner's alleged role in a proposed communications back channel with Russia during the transition.
I would just say that Mr. Kushner's attorney has said that Mr. Kushner has volunteered to share with Congress what he knows about these meetings.
Did the president discuss it, though?
I'm not going to get into what the president did or did not discuss, but what your question assumes is a lot of facts that are not substantiated by anything but anonymous sources that are so far being leaked out.
Does he approve of that action?
You're asking if he approves of an action that is not a confirmed action. That being said, I think Secretary Kelly and General McMaster have both discussed that in general terms, back channels are an appropriate part of diplomacy.
And that right there is the point. These new reports lack any substantive evidence of any wrongdoing, but the innuendo being pushed by the mainstream media is so thick you could choke on it. Additionally, Michael Cohen, a longtime personal lawyer to President Trump, confirming to Fox News that he's been asked to provide information to the Senate and House Intel committees over the Russia probe. However, he says he's not cooperating, claiming it's a, quote, total fishing expedition. Now, Kat and Eboni, we're going to get to the whole Russia probe thing, but a couple of things happened over the last couple of days I think are more detrimental to America than this whole Russia probe and investigations. On Sunday, Robert De Niro went to Brown University and told these graduating seniors that they're coming out into what he calls a tragic dumbass comedy. Really, that's disturbing. These are our youth. And Kat, yesterday or this morning, TMZ reported that, and I actually saw the video of this, of Kathy Griffin releasing a video shoot where she was actually holding a beheaded President Trump's head in her hand with a bleeding.
Saw it.
It's disgusting. It's vile. It's awful. But this is the kind of ratchet up rhetoric that the left and the media and Hollywood is willing to do to a Donald Trump. Can you imagine for 5 seconds if that was President Obama's head that someone was holding?
No, of course not. Of course not. Of course, Trump has been treated differently. And I don't understand what she was trying to gain from that. What kind of person would think, oh, that's awesome. I don't care if you like Trump or don't like Trump. It was absolutely desperate. Just write a joke.
Yeah.
You know, write a joke.
It's very lazy. Actually, I think that's a really good point. Coming from a comedian, you're right, Kat. Write a joke. Do something that's a little bit creative. And look, Eric, ultimately, you know what? The Dems are going to pay a price if this is all they come up with over the next 18 months, quite frankly. At some point, you have to have a political message that's going to be compelling to the American people. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at a long time of Donald Trump in the White House.
And in the meantime, they're going to continue harping on this Russian investigation. But let's meet today's specialist. He's a senior fellow at National Review Institute. He's a contributing editor at the National Review, and he's a former chief assistant U.S. attorney that led the terror prosecution against the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman. So he specializes in locking up bad guys. Andrew McCarthy is here. And he received his Ph.D. from Yale University, a former aide to Margaret Thatcher, and he's a former policy advisor to 3 U.S. presidential candidates, but he specializes in foreign policy. Dr. Nile Gardiner is here. Andrew, let me start with you. Your thoughts on all this back and forth. You know, you're a prosecutor. Your thought, is there any there?
There's no there as far as the collusion conspiracy is concerned. But I think the thing that happened this weekend that's really important that people miss because they're so giddy about this story about Kushner is it blew up the collusion conspiracy. Because if there had actually been a collusion conspiracy, there would already be back channels to Russia. There'd be no reason for Kushner in December, weeks after the election, to need to set up a back channel to Russia had there been one during the campaign. So I know for the moment they're loving the story, but I think it's kind of exploded the story that they've been telling us for 6 months.
And now we talked about this yesterday. We were here live yesterday, and we talked a little bit about the fact that under President Obama, there were back channels that were set up with Russia. In fact, John Kerry, as Secretary of State, Obama's Secretary of State, developed those back channels. You can go back through every single president in modern history, and there have been back channels, the Kennedys as well, right?
Well, that's right. And certainly the Obama administration went to extraordinary lengths, actually, to appease the Russian government under Vladimir Putin. And the same applied, of course, to the Iranian regime as well. Yet there wasn't the same kind of scrutiny of the Obama administration's actions, actually. And if you look at the Obama track record when it came to dealing with Russia and with Iran, it's really a track record of tremendous appeasement. The same also applied, of course, to Hillary Clinton as well when she was Secretary of State. Yet there wasn't this kind of tremendous scrutiny.
Why is that?
That's a very good question. I think there's a real double standard that's being applied. And actually, if you look at in fact, the policies of the Trump administration towards Russia, they're significantly tougher than the ones put in place by the Obama presidency, actually. And so the Russians aren't actually gaining anything at all, in fact, from this new Trump presidency being in place. And in fact, the Trump presidency has even talked about expanding sanctions against Moscow over Ukraine. And so this is tougher language than we saw coming from President Obama.
Frankly, though, I'm not impressed with tough language. That's just me. I'm impressed with tough action. And I said I thought the sanctions put forward by the administration of Barack Obama at the end were too little and too late. So I hope for America's sake that you're right, and we'll see that tough action follow the tough language.
He lifted sanctions. Before he left, Obama lifted sanctions.
Yeah, that was a problem. And he even placed them and he lifted them, and it was a mess either way, too little, too late. I want to speak to Michael Cohen and him not coming forward. I think as lawyers we know, I can't even believe that he was asked, quite frankly, only because I guess they had to, but privileged. I mean, certainly most of this information would be privileged, and no lawyer in his right mind ethically would avail and possibly breach that client confidentiality arrangement.
Well, this whole thing is kind of like that, right? If you watch the press briefing today, people are asking Sean Spicer questions that they full well know he can't answer. What do you think Donald Trump thinks about this? It's hypotheticals about hypotheticals, right? And it seems more like a kind of conversation you'd have over drinks, like gossiping and chit-chatting with your friends, than a kind of thing that would be televised and that he can really answer.
Right,
but it's all a charade, though. It's the kind of thing that if you were in a courtroom with a judge, they wouldn't allow it to go on.
Exactly,
and,
inadmissible.
Right, because the judge would say, knock it off.
Yeah.
You know,
But also point out the fact that this has been going on for decades. Decades of back-channeling. And again, let's point this out for 1,000th time. There's been zero evidence produced of any collusion between Trump's administration and the Russians, especially as far as influencing the election.
No, there's no there. There hasn't been from the beginning.
In the course of this investigation thus far.
As long as...
Eboni's been very consistent on this thus far, and you've been in favor of it.
The investigation hasn't concluded
but
yet,
how do you square this with the way our legal system works? You're innocent until proven guilty.
You absolutely are.
So at what point do you
I'm not
stop
someone
trying
that's in the favor of indicting President Trump at this point, Eric, and you know that. I haven't been unfair to the president at all. I also just want to be fair to the process, right, and let it play out and run its course.
Is it over processed, though?
Is it over? Is it
too much process?
Not at this point. Now, if we're 12 months from now and it's still going on, then I will give you that it's over processed.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I absolutely don't. People still have these questions, and I think that, which Spicer did at certain points today, but not consistently, just say, hey, there's an investigation. Kushner is going to talk about it. Just say as little as possible, really.
Especially since we have a new general counsel now. That has given everyone cover to just shut the hell up on TV.
Agreed.
But amid the media circus, John Sununu, the former governor of New Hampshire, went off on the mainstream media's coverage of the Russia probe. This was earlier today.
Look, you're asking hypotheticals on hypotheticals.
Well, I'm trying to actually take your temperature. I'm trying to gauge your comfort level with all of this.
My comfort level, the only discomfort I have is with folks in the media trying to create a venality without having the courage to specifically tell me what the venality that I should be concerned about is.
That's exactly what we were just pointing about the media asking the hypothetical of Sean Spicer.
If Kushner did this, how do you think Trump would feel about Kushner having done this thing that he maybe did or didn't do? What kind of use of anybody's time is that, really?
Well, we have two lawyers on set. Are you a lawyer as well?
I'm not a lawyer.
Just a PhD.
Just a Yale PhD.
So what's going on with the media? What's going on with the media and the press briefing?
But to Ebony's point, there is a proper investigation here, but it's a counterintelligence investigation involving Russia. And the only target or subject of a counterintelligence investigation is the foreign power that might have an impact on American interests. To the extent what they're doing here that's unfair is they're taking a situation where there is a proper investigation and they're conflating a criminal investigation with it, which there's no basis for.
Does the Michael Cohen being, I think he actually called himself now a, quote, target, whereas I think we made that distinguished before, where if you're just a person of interest, that's different from a target.
That's correct.
Not in a there is no target and no subject in a counterintelligence investigation. And this is what's so dishonest about what they're doing. target and subjects are terms of art in a criminal investigation for who a grand jury will probably indict or might indict. It's got nothing to do with a counterintelligence investigation, which
They're just
targets
seeking information.
Right. What is the foreign power doing that might compromise American interests?
Your thoughts now?
Yeah, I think, a key issue here, of course, is the ongoing leaks here, which are, I believe, extremely damaging to U.S. national interests. We saw that as well last week. Leaks with regard to the Manchester terror investigation, designed specifically, of course, to create a division between the United States and Great Britain. Fortunately, of course, no such division emerged, thanks to the strong leadership of Theresa May and also the fact that President Trump immediately reasserted the special relationship. But the reality is there are individuals who are leaking highly sensitive information for political reasons here.
Why do you think the media is not interested in the leaks? Certainly not to the extent that they are interested in finding some sort of collusion between the Trump administration and the Russians.
Because they had an agenda ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think this is really it's a largely political story here. And, you know, the reality is that U.S. policy towards Russia has not softened at all, actually, over the past few months. It is very important, though, I think, that the new Trump administration sends a very clear message to Moscow. They're not our friends, they're not our partners, they're not our allies. And I think that it's important for President Trump himself to send that message to Moscow.
To who? Who is it important to? I mean, so there's an appearance with amongst the American people that we still have a, I don't know, call it a fence or a distrust of Russia? I mean, what's the purpose of what you just outlined?
Well, I think, you know, a clear statement from the president would blow out of the water this sort of suggestion that he's being soft on the Russians or weak on the Russians, or there's some sort of pro-Russian agenda. And clearly, if you look at
that bothers me a little bit.
He bombed a Syrian airbase where Russians were actually stationed at and working side by side with Syria.
That's a very, very powerful statement to be making. And I think that we need to see more of those powerful statements. At the end of the day, the Russians are not our friends. They are a vicious adversary of the United States. And I think U.S. policy has to reflect that in every...
You don't want to have strategic confusion. I mean, you want the Russians to know that there are certain lines out there that if they cross them, we're not inviting them to cross them. It's going to be...
They have consequences.
I take certain issue with the idea that we need to sort of structure our foreign policy around what the media is going to say about it or what the media is going to do about it. I know that it's gotten so bad that there could be some truth to that, but I really resent that idea. I'm somebody who I agree with Eboni. I want to see the investigation go through. I have certain questions. But the way that people are reacting now, based on having no evidence other than suspicions and questions, I completely agree. But that just shows how it hurts the country as a whole, that Trump would even have to worry about something like that, rather than just saying, oh, what would be best for the country in this situation?
Well, final thought. Yeah, it's in the U.S. national interest to stand up to the Russians. They are the enemy of the free world. And so it's a fundamental...
Right, for that reason, of course.
A quick final thought. I don't like fishing expedition type things like this. To Kat's point, we cannot have a presumed ending before the investigation that will compromise any findings that we do get.
Very good. Leave it right there. White House shakeup, staff shakeup begins. Is this the start of getting President Trump's agenda back on track? And later, mayhem in Texas state legislature over the state's anti-sanctuary cities law. Eboni's docket is on the case. We'll be right back.
Would you cry? And would you cry tonight when inside?
A White House shakeup underway. The first person out the door, White House Communications Director Michael Dubke, who's resigning after 3 months on the job. So is this the beginning of the White House staffing overhaul to try and get President Trump and his agenda back in the driver's seat? Yeah, I don't know. Something's not working. Obviously, there changes need to happen, but you just can't have Trump saying one thing and his team saying another thing. And maybe people who understand him more would help that. But at the same time, you don't have to be a mind reader. Communication is what it comes down to. Yep. Communication between the staff and between the president.
So as far as the Russian investigation goes, we talked about how Trump is hiring a staff, a group, but he's putting together a war room to combat any sort of narrative that comes out there that they don't feel is a fair narrative, which I think is a great start. And in the meantime, of course, you're going to have turnover. You're going to have people in the communications, all levels of it. Don't forget, Miller, first, I can't remember his first name, but he was going to be their communications director. Stephen Miller?
Right.
No. No.
Some other Miller.
Yeah, the other. It'll come to me.
But Miller's
but so Sean Spicer was going to then take that job, and they realized he couldn't do both jobs. So then they brought in Dubke. Dubke apparently didn't like the way that the operation was running, so he put in his resignation. I guess May 18th, like whatever, 10 days ago. And so now I've said for a long time on this show that the communications department was the first thing that they needed to fix, and I think they're doing that.
You've been consistent on that, Eric. Yeah, exactly. The messaging has to be in sync. Despite what you think of it, it has to be in unison. You can't have these not just dual competing narratives, such like what we saw come out of the Comey thing. I think this is a part of the Trump administration that many people like, actually. That you know what, in the private sector world, if you're not doing a very good job, either step down or get fired. So turnover in and of itself doesn't really bother me.
No, but they're going to have a big problem until they get their own people throughout the bureaucry. I mean, the communications thing is one thing. Although, as you say, Kat...
I'm sorry, Jason Miller just came to me.
Jason Miller, right. But, if they don't get the internals of the messaging right, that's a disaster unto itself. But in terms of moving their agenda forward, if they don't get their own people in the bureaucracy, forget it.
Well, that'll help plugging the leaks. That'll certainly help.
That's where
this whole war room idea is brilliant. You put together, this is what we have, this is what we're going with, and then you put it out to your communications people.
Well, it's certainly a very, very bold step, but there's no doubt about it. If you're the White House Communications Director, it's one of the toughest jobs in the world, especially in the current environment. Extremely difficult. And I do think the president does best when he focuses on policy, when the policy message is very clear. For example, last week with the overseas tour, I think overwhelmingly that was actually one of the best weeks of his presidency so far. Very, very policy focused. And I think that when he sticks to policy initiatives, I think that, it's a far more positive sort of news agenda. When there's a sort of fixation on constantly being on defense against relentless sort of media attacks, the White House really sort of struggles there. So a strong policy focus with clear-cut, in my view, clear-cut conservative policies would be the best approach.
Don't want to talk policy. These reporters want to talk investigations. Russia, he tries to disseminate policy, and they don't want to hear anything of it.
But the foreign policy trip had a kind of a finite agenda. Like, they went to this place, we're going to accomplish this. Everybody was on the same page. The big problem I think they've had domestically is they're never on the same page. So you have with Comey, you have one situation where, the Department of Justice does this memo, and they're going to say it's the memo that's the reason, and then the next day Trump says something that contradicts.
And no matter who's in that position, if you're not communicating, those problems are still going to exist. No one, no matter how well they know Trump, no one's ever going to be able to read his mind totally. He's got to be able to make sure first that there's a unified message and everyone's going to be saying the same thing, because that didn't just not help, that created a lot of the problems.
But to Andy's point, and really to Eric's as well, the clock is ticking. Now, it's only, 6 months into this administration, but 2018 midterms will be coming, and the Democrats are out for blood, Eric, obviously. So this is the time where the president does have to get his agenda, whether it means getting rid of people, unclogging leaks, whatever. Get them out of there, get your agenda on message, get to those rallies so that people can have a very clear idea as to the successes of this administration.
Let's not lose sight of the fact that there are successes that are happening every day, every week.
I don't think I'm the one losing sight of them.
No, but the jobs creation, the economy's getting stronger. But again, all the people want to talk about, if you're in the mainstream media, is let's talk Russia investigation.
All right. Up next, chaos breaking out on the floor of Texas's state legislature all over the state's new anti-sanctuary cities law. It's the top of Eboni's docket right after this.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialist. Now it's time for the docket. Threats to, quote, put a bullet in your head. And not one, but 2 rounds of grown men almost having a fistfight. No, I'm not describing the inner city streets of Chicago. Instead, this chaotic scene took place at the Texas State House in Austin. On their final day of session, it seems like all hell broke loose as legislators threatened each other and almost came to blows. Republican Rep. Matt Rinaldi admitted to calling ICE agents on protesters and threatening to shoot Democratic Rep. Pancho Navarez, but allegedly only in self-defense because he was assaulted and Navarez threatened his life. Really, gentlemen? This ridiculous and almost dangerous scenario gives us all a very literal image of just how polarizing and emotionally gripping the debate around illegal immigration and sanctuary cities has gotten. This insanity is a response to Texas's new law, SB 4, which demands that local police chiefs and sheriffs, under even the threat of jail or removal from office, comply with federal requests to hold suspects for possible deportations. The new law reminds us of a 2010 Arizona, quote, show me your papers measure, which allowed police to ask about a person's immigration status during routine interactions, like traffic stops. By the way, that Arizona law was eventually struck down in court. Now, I don't believe in cherry picking which laws to follow and which ones to disregard based on politics or anything else. The moment you enter our country without following our legal immigration process, you are rightly subjected to deportation. Yes, our immigration system is slow and it's expensive and it's really broken, but two wrongs don't make a right. So you do not get to break our laws without consequence. But this new Texas law, much like the Arizona one before it, triggers big constitutional concerns around our Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Put simply, if skin color becomes the only test for asking for someone's immigration papers, then we are not the land our forefathers intended, and the Constitution isn't worth the piece of paper it's written on. For whichever side of this debate you find yourself, certainly as a civilized society, we are better than our lawmakers acting like criminals themselves. Certainly, we can come up with a safe, constitutional, and legal way to fix our very broken and divisive immigration problem. Counselor, what are your take and prediction around the fate of SB 4?
Well, look, my take is that there's absolutely nothing inappropriate about being asked in terms of being identified what your immigration status is. The Supreme Court has held that it's fine. It's not the most intrusive thing, actually, that happens in a lot of interaction with police, so I think people are whipped up about it unnecessarily. It also seems to me that if you don't want to enforce the federal immigration laws, maybe states and localities ought to have some rhythm to be able to do that, but they shouldn't get federal money. That's fair. They're sovereign. They should be able to have some, I think, important degree of protection in how they govern themselves. But if they take the federal money, they got to enforce the federal law.
I'm coming to you right quick, Eric, on it, but I do want to ask you this. So if it's constitutional in your view, why do you think the Arizona law saw such challenges and ultimately was struck down because it said that it was encroaching on those Fourth Amendment protections?
The whole Arizona law was not struck down.
Not the whole thing,
right,
but
three-quarters of it. And then there was nothing that the court held that said that you can't ask somebody.
So it's not, I don't think it's the asking of the question as I understood the opinion.
Right.
I think it's how it's implemented. Like so many things, like stop and frisk. It's not unconstitutional on its face either. It's the having the reason to stop and having what's deemed necessary.
Can I jump in here?
Go ahead.
I think I love the docket. I understand where you're coming from. I even have a solution which we've talked about. I think there are ways of fixing some of the immigration problem. But you keep applying constitutionality. Let's remind everyone that these are illegal immigrants who come over here. They're not U.S. citizens. Now, they don't get the full,
they sure don't.
The full Monty of constitutional protection.
But you know who does, Eric? Black and brown people that are United States citizens.
Well, even illegal aliens. If you think somebody's got dope in their house and they're an illegal alien, you don't get to knock the door down. You have to go get a warrant.
The due process is one thing.
That's the Fourth Amendment.
Of course it is, but they don't get Second Amendment protections. There are a lot of them. They don't get to vote. So let's not apply the full Constitution to this group.
I hear you, and I wasn't doing that. I'm actually talking about American citizens that might have their Fourth Amendment rights impeached by this. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think she was saying against illegal immigrants, but against people that might have to stop and have their. Not necessarily. I think that the point was that it could lead to profiling, where people who are citizens but who are of a certain ethnicity would be targeted for something like this. And also there's constitutional issues when it comes to separation of powers and all of that. I think that when I see something that happened like this in Texas with a lot of the protesters having signs saying, I'm illegal and I'm staying here and you can't do anything about it. What is with that kind of attitude? And who can justify that as okay? Because there's some of these stories that you'll say, oh, okay, someone who's 26 and came here and he was 12 years old. You're 12 years old and your family's going to the United States. You're not going to say, no, Mom, I'm not supposed to. You're going to go with your mom because you're 12 years old. But as soon as you take this attitude of, like you said, taunting, what good is that doing? And that does make people angry.
Doc, let me get you in on this because some people do feel like an ends justify the means. And that's why I said in the docket, for me, two wrongs don't make a right. Our immigration system has serious problems, and it's way too hard, I think, for some people to get in here. Not all. But does that make this okay? This type of we're going to bypass it. We're not going to even pretend to follow the law.
Well, firstly, I might say, thank God for Governor Abbott and the state of Texas for enforcing the rule of law. Sanctuary cities, the idea that you can have cities that violate the rules of the land, I mean, it's just absolutely preposterous, in fact. And I think that it's only right that states crack down on sanctuary cities, and I think Texas is leading the way here. I don't think even in liberal Europe you would have sanctuary cities existing, although you could say, Germany's become a sort of sanctuary country under Angela Merkel. But the idea that, you tolerate the idea of safe havens for illegal immigrants, I think that, that goes against really the very foundations of the United States based upon the rule of law in this country. You simply cannot tolerate it.
Due respect, I'm not with you all the way on that. I mean, the states are sovereign, and that's the way it is in this system. If they want to have a policy that's more open to people of questionable pedigree in terms of their legal right to be here, that's okay with me. I just don't want to pay for it.
Yeah, but there are those who say, and your
model of that.
repair of that is that you pull back federal funds, right? Well, there are people who say that's unconstitutional.
Well,
that's
no,
not
you can't
fair.
have both. You have to do one way or the other.
I'm on board with you. I agree with you. Here's the other issue we have here. We want states to be, we want to push our laws to the states, right? The way we do with marijuana laws. So you can't also have it both ways. Either you're going to abide by...
Those are also competing.
Right.
Yeah, right now there's a federal,
you have to either apply one. I mean, if you're going to break the marijuana laws on a state level or municipal level, do you also pull back federal funding from these states because they're breaking the marijuana?
I say yes, but I'd like to see the federal government doing a lot less, and the states, if they want to have these generous policies, fine, but they pay for them. Don't socialize the cost onto everybody else.
These conflicting jurisdictional issues keep coming up. The U.S. conducting its first ever test to shoot down an ICBM missile today. And the military now reporting, thank God, it's a success. What it means for the standoff with North Korea in a moment.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Andrew McCarthy and Nile Gardiner. Now let's continue the conversation. The U.S. military conducting its first ever test to destroy an intercontinental ballistic missile in mid-flight just a short time ago, and the military now declaring it a success. It's a critical advance for the technology as North Korea races to develop a long-range missile that could potentially hit the U.S. mainland. Just this morning, North Korea issued a defiant new language promising to, quote, deliver a, quote, bigger gift package for the U.S. following yet another successful shorter-range missile test on Sunday. Now, I want to start with you. The USS Nimitz is on its way. Ronald Reagan is there. Carl Vinson is there. We have 3 carrier strike groups in the Korean area, peninsula area. What is China thinking? Why aren't they leaning harder on North Korea right now?
Well, that's a very good question. Certainly on the U.S. side, I think the president's doing all the right things, increasing the pressure significantly, boosting the American military presence in the region. He's also, of course, reaching out to the Chinese here. And China, of course, is very, very slow to move. And they have been very slow to move for many, many years, even decades on the North Korean front. We do need to see more action being taken by Beijing. If they don't, then certainly the United States needs to ramp up these existing sanctions against North Korea, and also the military presence in the region. Without a doubt, I think the intercontinental ballistic missile threat posed by North Korea looms larger and larger by the day. That is their ultimate goal, to be able to strike against the United States. They're not that far off now.
And Kat, that test that we performed this morning, that missile defense system launched from California, went into outer space and knocked down an intercontinental ballistic missile. They called it something like shooting a bullet with a bullet. And something like more than 1,000 miles an hour at point of contact. That's a big message to Kim Jong-un.
Absolutely. And boom, it was a success. So kind of check yourself sort of a thing there. But yeah, China needs to do a little more. I did like Trump's little tweet to China saying what they're trying very hard, something that we millennials call subtweeting. He was kind of subtweeting a country, which was very interesting, but they do need to step
trolling?
it up.
Is that trolling?
Yeah,
I thought it was trolling.
Well, he's sort of, kind of like, hey, he's trolling them. But which is an interesting way to handle it, but everybody was talking about it, everyone was paying attention to it, because this would be a serious issue for everyone, including China, so I don't really understand it. Like you mentioned yesterday, they'd have a refugee issue, they'd have all kinds of issues. issues. But that's great to see that that happened, and whoever is responsible for that should be having a great day and go celebrate and have a drink.
And yet this guy, this Kim Jong-un, Eboni, continues to defy America, even defying China.
Yeah, he's defying the world at this point, and you talked about it very accurately, Eric. To me, China's got all the incentive in the world to get this right, get aggressive. I don't know what they're waiting on exactly, but what I'm glad to hear is that our government is not waiting, is that we are getting in front of this. We're not being reactive, we're being very proactive, and I'm so happy that this was a success today.
Yeah, but let's remember, China regards the United States as a geopolitical enemy, or foe, at least. North Korea is still very useful to them, and part of the reason that they haven't taken action is precisely because they're testing Trump. They have other disputes with us in the region. It's not like a situation where they think the only problem in the equation is North Korea, which is a problem they're actually quite used to dealing with, a rabid dictator on their border. What they don't want to have happen is regime change in North Korea, where you have a democratic government set up, which is very destabilizing for China. So as long as that dictator is useful to them, he'll be there.
Okay. So then let me ask you this. I know we're not supposed to do this. We're probably not even supposed to talk about doing this. But is there some sort of covert action going on right now where Kim Jong-un is taken out?
I mean, I expect all sorts of scenarios are being mapped out, as they are on so many strategic fronts, actually. You know, with regard to Kim Jong-un, he's a lot more dangerous than his father. And, of course, his father was no saint. You know, Kim Jong-un has conducted actually 3 times as many missile tests as his father did in 18 years. Kim Jong-un's been in power for just 5 years, actually, so an extremely dangerous individual. I do think the approach being taken by the Trump administration so far is the right one, but you can be sure they're certainly gaming out all sorts of potential scenarios, worst case.
Can we also point out that President Xi of China was at Mar-a-Lago when Donald Trump launched the 59 Tomahawk missiles into Syria. So Xi knows that Trump is not afraid to pull the trigger. You would think at some point China is going to say, back off now, Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, they should be doing that. And also, of course, the Chinese play a big role as well in terms of North Korea's nuclear weapons development. After all, a lot of the technology transfers are from Beijing or from businessmen based in China going to North Korea. We need to be able to crack down on that through Beijing. And the Chinese do need to be a lot more cooperative if we're going to see a peaceful solution.
What we did in Syria is not really comparable to what we'd have to do in North Korea in the situation. Of course, it was an expression of being tough and not being afraid to show that we're tough. But that everybody knows what it would cost us to get involved in something like that. So I think that they're really just testing us. They're going to push us as far as they can.
And will China. China will
exactly.
as well.
I was going to say, you think that this is China calling President Trump's bluff?
China loves to appear like they're being helpful while they're doing nothing, and that's pretty much what
they're not doing nothing. They're actually building islands in the South Sea that against international rule.
Right.
Yeah, all right, we'll leave it right there.
That's the trying hard.
Portland, Oregon's mayor calls for the shutdown of free speech and anti-Sharia law rallies in the wake of the city's brutal stabbing attack. How is this the answer to fighting hatred? Don't go away.
A battle over free speech coming to a head in Portland, Oregon, in the wake of Friday's stabbing rampage, where a suspect with known extremist beliefs killed 2 people and severely wounded another. The city's mayor is now calling for the cancellation of 2 upcoming events, a Trump free speech rally and an anti-Sharia law protest.
My main concern is that they are coming to peddle a message of hatred and of bigotry. I'm appealing to the organizers of the alt-right events to cancel the events that they've scheduled.
The mayor also writing on his Facebook page, quote, "I'm calling on the federal government to immediately revoke the permits they have issued for the June 4th event and to not issue a permit for the June 10th. Both events take place in a plaza that's on federal land." All right. Yeah, I have just one concern with this guy, just that he's putting his own convenience over the First Amendment. So ideologically, I have a problem with it. And also, logistically, if you're worried about free speech people getting too mad, what you're going to do is take away their speech, and that's going to make it better. I don't see any justification for this. Absolutely. I don't see any justification for this. What's he thinking?
You remember, you don't remember, this was before your time, but maybe the late 80s, early 90s, the KKK, as despicable as they are and were allowed to march in Skokie, Illinois, a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. Look, and Kat, you're right. Free speech is protected, even if it's ugly and gross and hateful. And in this case, it's still talking about free speech, and that's what he's shutting down.
I hear the guy say they're coming here to peddle a message, and the buzzer in my head goes, that's the end of the from the First Amendment perspective. Right. He's allowed to come to peddle a message, as long as it's not incitement to crime. Then he can peddle the message.
So I, as I'm sure everyone at this table, abhors what happened in Portland and the tremendous, horrible violence that took place. You know what, Eric, to your example, that must have been around my time. I actually, as an undergrad at UNC, went and protested the KKK, our black student movement.
Good for you.
Peacefully went and protested because we wanted to engage in a dialogue and in that type of intellectual thought. This chills the First Amendment protections, and it actually is a circular in-run argument around the very thing they're saying they're trying to prevent.
Well, it's an adoption of Sharia standards too, which is the more frightening thing. Well, look, if you say, you know, apostasy from Islam under Sharia is a death sentence, or Sharia systematically discriminates against women, that's not hate speech. That's fact. No. Now, I wish it wasn't.
And even if it is hate speech, even if it were, that's also protected.
Hate speech is also protected speech. People say, they seem to forget that. Well, I don't know. What do you think now?
Well, I think the First Amendment is sacrosanct, and, you know, you have to defend freedom of speech. And once you're on the slippery path of suppressing free speech, that's a path to totalitarianism. And America is all about freedom of speech. And I think that as long as you have freedom of speech in America, this is still a free country.
Right. Yeah.
And we have to defend it.
His only argument was that it was going to make things kind of harder for him. It's going to make the city a little more of a mess, be a little bit more difficult.
Be a little more expensive.
Yeah, it's a little hard to be the mayor. If you don't want to have a hard job, I don't know, go work in marketing or whatever else, get a normal job and relax. Don't do that. You know what I mean? A job that's not where you're going to have to deal with things like this.
I know some people that work in marketing.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying that you won't have to deal with these kinds of things, where you won't have to deal with protests. That is your job as a mayor, to deal with these exact kind of issues. You can't just opt out of it.
And this is federal land. This is a federal plaza he has no jurisdiction over what can and cannot be said or done there, and those permits were permitted, and they'll go through with it.
Yeah, of course.
You can't have a functioning democracy if every time an uncomfortable subject comes up, we can't talk about it because people are going to shout them down.
Unless it's Berkeley, California.
Well, right. Charles Murray or Ian Hersey Ali or Heather McDonald or any of these, they can't even speak in a classroom.
Well, and this is the problem with our country right now. And while we are so divided amongst these class and racial and cultural and regional lines, people don't feel they're being heard. So we have to stop the knee-jerk reaction to silence voices and opinions we don't like.
Your whole, as an elected official, your whole job is supposed to be to, above all, protect our freedoms.
Yes.
And if you're going to put your own convenience over that, then maybe you should get a different job. All right. When we return, we circle back with our specialists, Andy McCarthy and Dr. Nile Gardiner, right after this.
You don't want it, I want to move it. And if you want me, girl, you got it. There's nothing I know I would.
Time to circle back with our specialists, Andy McCarthy and Nile Gardiner. All right, start with you, Doc. You have worked for both U.S. and British governments. What's the biggest differences?
That's a very good question. I think there are, of course, a lot of similarities. And I would say, you know, that there are no two greater nations on earth than the United States and Great Britain. And the special relationship between our two great countries is the most powerful force for freedom today. And so I've been very privileged to work with political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic, and it is, of course, you know, a tremendous privilege to be living in the United States now, which is a true force for liberty and freedom on the world stage, and long may that continue.
Can I follow you up with this question? So we saw Brexit, we saw the anti-globalist, nationalist, populist movement go from Britain to here in the United States with Donald Trump. Can it continue?
Yeah, I think, you know, Brexit is an immensely powerful force. It's a tremendous force for freedom. And Brexit is also great news for the United States as well. And I think that it's going to strengthen the special relationship between the US and the UK. And Brexit is also going to tremendously impact the whole of Europe, actually. And I think you are going to see a tremendous drive for sovereignty and self-determination.
Can it spread?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah, Andrew, I just wanted to ask you about the Trump-Russia investigation. If you give one piece of advice for Trump on handling this and his team, what would it be?
We have to make it clear that there's a proper counterintelligence investigation of Russia that he's interested in and wants to get to the bottom of, but that this is being used to create a criminal investigation that doesn't exist. And I don't think that point should be that hard to get across.
Don't hear people making it really at all.
Well, Andy just did. There you go. Thank you so much to our Fox News specialists today, Mr. Andy McCarthy and Dr. Nile Gardiner. And thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you follow us on social media at SpecialistFNC on both Twitter and Facebook. And remember, 5 o'clock will never be the same. Special report up next.